On my wedding day, in front of everyone, my husband slapped me. All because I didn't give up my seat for his mother. He then demanded that I apologize to her or leave the wedding. Without hesitation, I walked out, leaving everything behind. Now, he's frantically calling me, begging for forgiveness. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the day I had dreamed about for years, my wedding day in Chicago. It was meant to be a celebration of love and joy, surrounded by family and friends. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that shattered everything I believed in. The ceremony was beautiful. The music played softly, the flowers were arranged perfectly, and the guests were all smiles. I looked around the room, feeling a rush of excitement and anticipation. Peter and I had been planning this day for months, and I couldn't wait to begin our life together. But as the evening progressed, things took a turn for the worse. It started when Peter's mother, Mrs. Johnson, approached me with a stern look on her face. She was in her late 50s, with an air of authority that often overshadowed everyone around her. "Scarlett," she said, her voice tripping with disdain. "I need to speak with you." I followed her to a quieter corner of the venue, hoping it was just a minor concern, but Mrs. Johnson's face was flushed with anger. "You've been incredibly disrespectful today," she declared, her eyes narrowing. "You've embarrassed me in front of all these people." I was taken aback. I had been nothing but polite and respectful. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She didn't give me a chance to explain. "Don't act innocent," she snapped. "You think you can come into this family and behave however you like? You're a disgrace." Peter, who had been mingling with the guests, came over at that moment. He looked from his mother to me, his expression unreadable. "What's going on here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Scarlett has been disrespectful," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice rising. "She's ruined the day for everyone." Before I could defend myself, Peter's face twisted with anger. "Is this true?" he demanded, his gaze piercing. "Have you been causing trouble?" "No," I said, feeling the sting of his accusation. "I haven't done anything wrong. I was just trying to enjoy our wedding." But Peter's eyes hardened. "You've made a fool of yourself and my mother," he said, his voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "This is unacceptable." The word stung, but nothing prepared me for what happened next. In a shocking move, Peter raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the room, and I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. My face burned, not just from the physical pain, but from the sheer embarrassment of being hit in front of everyone. The room fell silent. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, but no one intervened. Peter's mother watched with a satisfied smirk, as if she had won some victory. "You're a fat woman who's dishonored my mother," Peter shouted, his voice filled with venom. "I can't believe I married someone like you." I stood there stunned, tears welling up in my eyes. The crowd was a blur of shocked faces. I wanted to run, to hide from the world, but instead I found myself standing frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Peter's behavior wasn't just shocking, it was a devastating blow. In front of all those people, I felt my dignity slip away. As the guests slowly resumed their conversations, I felt the weight of their judgment on me. The laughter and music seemed to mock my misery. When I finally managed to compose myself, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I excused myself from the reception and found a quiet place in the back of the venue, away from prying eyes. The tears flowed freely now as I tried to process the events of the evening. I'd always imagined this day as a fairy tale, a dream come true. Instead, it had turned into a cruel reminder of the harsh reality I was facing. My marriage, which I had hoped would bring me happiness and security, had revealed itself as a sham. Peter's and his mother's behavior was more than just a fleeting moment of anger. It was a glimpse into a toxic and abusive dynamic I had not fully understood before. The humiliation of the evening was a harsh wake-up call. I knew I couldn't allow this to be the end of my story. As I looked at my reflection in the dim light, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not remain a victim of their cruelty. I would seek justice and expose the truth, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be. The wedding, once a symbol of new beginnings, had become a turning point in my life. The pain and betrayal I felt were profound, but they also ignited a fire within me. I knew that the road to reclaiming my life and seeking justice would be long and arduous, but I was determined to face it head-on. This was just the beginning of my fight. In the weeks following the disastrous wedding, I felt like I was living in a fog. The pain of Peter's public humiliation was still fresh. But what stung even more was the realization that my marriage had been a facade. Despite the turmoil, I knew I couldn't let Peter and Mrs. Johnson's cruelty define my life. I needed to take control and find a way to fight back. The first step in my plan was to gather evidence. I knew that exposing Peter and his mother would require more than just my word. I needed proof of the emotional and financial abuse I had endured. That's when I decided to hire Detective Robert Hayes, a private investigator known for his discretion and effectiveness. I reached out to him and after a brief consultation, he agreed to take on my case. Detective Hayes was in his mid-40s, with a calm demeanor and a sharp mind. He listened intently as I recounted the events of the wedding and described the pattern of abuse I had experienced. "I understand how difficult this must be for you," he said, "but if you're willing to work with me, we can get to the bottom of this." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. "I just want the truth to come out." With Detective Hayes on board, I started recording my conversations with Peter and Mrs. Johnson. It was uncomfortable and stressful, but I knew it was necessary. I hid a small recorder in my purse, making sure to capture every conversation I had with them. It wasn't long before I realized how manipulative and abusive they truly were. Now comment update to tag you on part 2. One evening, Peter and I had a heated argument over dinner. I was recording the conversation, and I remember feeling a mix of dread and determination as I listened to Peter's angry outbursts. "You're so useless," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Why can't you do anything right?" I tried to stay calm. "I'm doing my best," I said, but Peter's response was venomous. "Your best isn't good enough. You're a burden on me and my mother. Everyone can see it." As I listened to these recordings later, I realized how deeply rooted the abuse was. It wasn't just about public humiliation, it was a pattern of emotional cruelty that had been going on for years. I began to piece together a narrative of their behavior, which made me even more determined to expose them. Meanwhile, Detective Hayes was investigating their financial dealings. He conducted background checks and looked into their accounts, searching for signs of wrongdoing. After a few weeks, Detective Hayes returned with troubling news. "I found some suspicious transactions," he said, his face serious. "It looks like Peter and Mrs. Johnson might be involved in financial fraud." My heart raced as Detective Hayes laid out the details. Large sums of money were being transferred between various accounts, suggesting they might be embezzling funds from clients. The revelation was shocking, but it made sense. Peter was a financial advisor, and Mrs. Johnson had always been heavily involved in his business. Their abusive behavior was now taking on a more sinister dimension. They weren't just controlling and cruel, they were criminals. I knew I needed more than just these financial records to take them down. The recordings of our conversations were crucial, but I also needed to bring all the evidence together. That's where Anna, my best friend, came in. Anna was in her early 30s, fiercely loyal and incredibly sharp. She had been my rock during this tumultuous time, offering support and encouragement. When I shared the evidence with her, Anna's reaction was a mix of shock and determination. "We have to do something with this," she said, examining the recordings and financial documents. "This isn't just about you anymore. They're committing serious crimes." Anna and I began analyzing everything we had collected. We went through the recordings, highlighting instances of emotional abuse, and cross-referenced them with the financial documents. It was exhausting work but also empowering. With each piece of evidence we reviewed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as we pored over the documents, Anna looked up from her notes. "Scarlett, you've already come so far," she said. "You've gathered a lot of evidence. Now it's time to take the next step." I nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and resolve. "I know," I said. "I'm ready to expose them. They need to be held accountable for what they've done." Our plan was to organize a large event where I would reveal the truth about Peter and Mrs. Johnson. I wanted it to be a public affair so their deceit and cruelty would be laid bare for everyone to see. The idea was both daunting and exhilarating. It was the final step in my journey, from victim to someone who would fight for justice. As we prepared for the event, I could feel the weight of the upcoming revelation bearing down on me. Despite the fear, I was driven by a deep sense of justice and a desire to reclaim my life. With Detective Hayes' help, Anna's unwavering support, and the evidence we had gathered, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The day of the event arrived, and the tension was palpable. I had planned it meticulously, ensuring every detail was in place. The venue was a grand hall, elegantly decorated, with an air of sophistication that belied the truth I was about to reveal. I had invited family, friends, and media representatives, hoping to ensure the truth would be seen and heard by as many people as possible. As the guests filled the hall, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. The room buzzed with excitement and curiosity, but I couldn't shake the nerves fluttering in my stomach. Peter and Mrs. Johnson were among the attendees, standing by my side with confident smiles. They had no idea what was about to unfold. The event started with speeches and toasts, creating a festive atmosphere. I played the part of the gracious hostess, all the while feeling like an actor in my own drama. I took deep breaths, trying to calm myself as the moment approached. When it was time for my announcement, I stepped up to the podium. The crowd grew silent, and all eyes were on me. Peter and Mrs. Johnson exchanged glances, their smiles still intact but tinged with curiosity. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. This event was organized to celebrate a new beginning, but it has become something much more significant. The guests looked intrigued as I continued. "What I'm about to share has been hidden for too long. It's about the truth behind the facade that Peter and his mother have maintained." I saw Peter's smile falter as I spoke, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Mrs. Johnson's expression remained neutral, but I sensed the tension in her posture. I took a deep breath and pressed a button on a remote control. The large screen behind me flickered to life, displaying a series of audio recordings and financial documents. The first recording began to play, a conversation between Peter and me during one of our arguments. Peter's angry outbursts echoed through the room, his harsh words cutting like a knife. The guests listened in stunned silence as the recording revealed the emotional abuse I had endured. Shock and sympathy washed over their faces as Peter's cruel words filled the air. Next, the screen switched to the financial documents Detective Hayes had uncovered. Large sums of money had been transferred between various accounts, highlighting the fraudulent activities Peter and Mrs. Johnson were involved in. The figures were staggering, and the evidence was irrefutable. As the recordings and documents were presented, Peter's demeanor changed. His face grew pale, and his eyes darted around the room, realizing the gravity of the situation. Mrs. Johnson's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as she helplessly watched the truth be laid bare. Empowered, I continued. These recordings and documents are evidence of the abuse and fraud that Peter and his mother have perpetrated. Now comment update to tag you on part 3.